Leeds United made the most of their second chance in the European Cup against Stuttgart, the team they say has more foreign reserves than the Bank of England. Leeds won 2-1 in Barcelona in front of a tiny crowd. Their hero was Shutt. He scored the winner less than a minute after coming on as a substitute, and tomorrow's his birthday.
And welcome back to another episode of Talking More Shutt, the Talking Shutt podcast spin-off where we get guests on and around from all over the world to talk about Leeds United. And today I'm pleasured and honoured to welcome Leeds United fan, massive Leeds United fan and author, Rob Bagchi. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
No, absolutely. So we're going to get into Rob's ribs in a little bit about his time following Leeds United as a youngster and also growing up. And then we're going to eventually get on to his new book, The Biography of Leeds United, which I've got right here, which I'm currently digesting, as I was just saying to Rob off air, when my kids will allow me to in these crazy COVID times where they can't go out and play and stuff like that. So, Rob, I think the best place to start, mate, is growing up and Leeds United. When did they first sort of bless you with their presence or taint you, depend which way you look at it?
Well, I was born in 1967 in Wakefield. So, as you know, Wakefield back then didn't have a team. So Leeds were always going to be our team. I'm fortunate enough to have an older brother who's 15 months older than me. So he broke down a lot of the barriers with the family of pestering them about wanting to be taken to matches. It coincided, that early childhood with us being the greatest team in the land, so it was really fortunate and went to a couple of games right at the end of the 73-74 season when my brother had managed to persuade my parents to let us go, and my dad sort of one of his mates who took his own two kids to the ground, so we managed to go. I don't remember a great deal about what happened on the pitch, but I do remember sort of going up to Elland Road and seeing the huge floodlights and just being completely awestruck by it. And from then on, it was a bit more sporadic until 76 when I got my first junior season ticket. I was fortunate enough, me and my brother, my dad's mate and his two kids, we all were in the West Stand for a couple of seasons, and then sort of being old enough to go yourself. And then, would go around the ground, different spots in the Cobb, northeast corner, until just when we got promoted in 1990, and then bought a season ticket again, and then had one for the next 15 years. At first in the low fields, and then in the East Stand at the top when that was built, and then came back round to the West Stand. Because although I like the top of the East Stand now, but back then it just seemed so alien because I was sort of used to standing at the side of the pitch, and when your sight line is the motorway rather than the pitch, and you're sort of leaning forward all the time, it was really disarming for that first couple of seasons. So so we went back to the West Stand for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I watched my first game in the East Stand Upper. My first ever game was Leeds Sheffield Wednesday from the East Stand Upper. And I remember getting up there thinking, well, this is a bit strange. I didn't expect to be this far away from the pitch, having never really been to a football match before. I think the only football match I took in before that was Barnsley versus Charlton Athletic at Oakwell, before it became all-seater when they still had the standing and the... I seem to just remember the railings between, obviously, the standing area people used to lean against and stuff like that. So, yeah, I can definitely associate with... Now, I refuse to sit in the East Stand Up unless I absolutely have to, because for some reason it just seems to take away a little bit from the game, really. Do you remember your first game then? Do you remember which game it was, Rob?
Well, it was against Man City in March 1974. I know that we won 1-0 and that Lorimer scored with a penalty, but I don't really have any fresh memories of what actually happened. It was more about the experience than anything else. That Everybody seemed to smoke back then, so it was, as you made your way up, you made your way up through a fog of smoke. It was a damp day, and that emerald green of the pitch when you first see it for the first time, and it's still a thrill today, to walk up those little narrow ginnels or up the steps, and you see the pitch, and it's just, I know it sounds a bit dopey, but it's still magical. I've always found it, get in there, a sort of homecoming, really. But no, the most memorable matches I remember of those early period are from when the decline first started to happen, really, the 76-77 season. Particularly the first match of the season, we go 2-0 down against Johnny Giles' West Brom, and we're all thinking, well, here's Giles come back. We obviously sold him too soon. Part of you thinks he should have been the manager anyway. And I mean, we did recover and draw 2-2, but it all sort of felt that, only a year after the European Cup final, that things were massively changing. And it was all a bit disconcerting in the late 70s because there's a lot of turmoil off the pitch as well. It was a lot of aggro. And although, part of it's really exciting when you're a kid, your parents are really scared of it as well. And I remember my mum saying, I don't mind you going, but, you've got to stay away from those horses. And she used to be petrified about, the ranks of police horses would just trot down Elland Road and under the underpass and everything. It would just be, you don't really notice it at the time. But looking back, you think, would I send a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid there, even with a chaperone? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I've got a similar mum story as well. Obviously, for people who listen and watch week in, week out, they'll know that I served in the military, and I'd just come back from an operational tour, and I was taking my girlfriend at the time, to Leeds Bradford at Elland Road. I think it was the JPT trophy or something. And I vividly remember my mum ringing me up before saying, "You be careful at Elland Road." I was like, "Mum, I've just been in the Middle East for the last 4.5 months. I think I'll be all right at Elland Road if I'm really honest." But isn't it funny how Elland Road has a little bit of a homely feel? I mean, I've said this quite a few times, and people think I'm strange. Obviously, I live North Barnsley, but I regularly, when times were a bit more normal, I regularly used to drive to Elland Road for no other reason than just going for a walk around Elland Road. I'm not going to meet anybody. I've got no intention of going in shop. Just going for a walk around because it brings so many fond memories, and it's like a safe place. Weirdly, it's like a warming place for me. I don't know why.
Same here, I mean, I don't get there as often as I'd like, and it's a far more, welcoming place than it used to be in terms of, the Bremner statue, the square, the Revies statue, and everything, and the shop itself. But it's all about the memories, and it's about the ghosts that are there, and the emotions that it can trigger within you. That you do feel that, this is where my heart is, and it's such a strange thing because you obviously love your family, you love your kids, but this is also part of your life, and it'll never go.
Yeah, isn't it funny how it gets ingrained in you? The club intertwines into your very being, and it becomes so much about everything. And I've got a couple of really great memories, and one of my favourite ones is the West Brom game when Pablo scored after 16 seconds. We've been on a terrible run, and I remember going to that game feeling quite nervous because I remember thinking if West Brom get an early goal here, we could be up against it. And we were still chasing Sheffield United at that point. And then Pablo scored after 16 seconds, and we were absolutely on fire. But the one thing that sticks in my mind is I remember looking across at my son because he was sat a couple of seats away from me with some friends. I looked over, and the entire East Stand and the Cop and the South Stand and parts of the West Stand were all had scarves waving, singing "We Are the Champions, Champions of Europe." And I looked at him; he was just totally fixated with it. And I remember thinking, it's got you now. That's it. You'll never get rid of that. It's in you now.
Yeah, it will be. It'll be in there all the time. And I sort of had similar experiences taking my son. I mean, we tend to go in the family bit when he comes. And he too spends most of the time, he's 11 now, but he spent most of the time just watching the South Stand, watching the Cup, rather than what's going on in the pitch, almost open-mouthed about it. And you can just feel it, just all soaking into him. It's brilliant to see, really, really heartwarming.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming up to the modern day then, Rob, what have you made of Leeds back in the Premier League? It became the promised land for so long, 16 long years outside the Premier League. And we all, just hoped and prayed season on season that we'd get back there. And we've eventually got back there. And what have you made of our first sort of forays into the Premier League? Because we're still in the infancy of the Premier League season. There's a lot of games to be played. But what have you made of Marcelo Bielsa's Premier League Leeds United?
Well, I think there's two things really. I mean, I working as a football journalist, I have watched an awful lot of Premier League matches over the past 10, 15 years, and I did not think, as some of our fans were saying, it's going to be fine. We're going to be aiming for top 6 and everything. And I know when we got promoted in 1990, we immediately were right up there. Finished 4th, and it's just changed a little bit. So, but I have been extremely impressed by how fluid our attack is and how well they're playing in this division. Some of the passing movement that we've even not just transferred from the Championship, but it's much quicker, slicker. They've got far more space. So yeah, I've been really impressed by that. Obviously, there's a worry that is creeping in after the Wolves game, after the Leicester game, and certainly the Palace game, that we are far too open. But I just think that's the price you pay with Marcelo Bielsa. And those 3 teams, I've seen a bit of them, have something in common. And this is not to denigrate them at all, but they're not really interested in putting on a show. They sit back, they wait to punish your mistakes. And, we are a team. I think Robin Koch's going to be a great player, but there's a difference between a £12 million centre half and that guy Leicester bought Fofana for 35 million. And as my mate was saying, mistakes are sort of priced in at 12 million quid, and he does make mistakes, and he's going to get better. And he didn't have a proper pre-season, but I still think we'll be fine because the attack is so dynamic. But I'm just hoping that, I do think there are 3, 4, 5 teams that are worse than us, even at our worst. I think we'll be fine staying up, but the number of goals that we are leaking is because we are so vibrant in going forward. I don't know whether it's naivety or whether it's just that, Bielsa isn't bothered about, just settling for a 2-1 defeat. It's not about dignity. It's about going for it. And, that's what endears him to us. So I think we'll be all right. And I think we've got some games against teams that they're, if their fans were in, if you went to Chelsea, if you went to Man United, they wouldn't allow their teams to sit back against you. They'd be screaming blue murder if they did that against a promoted team. So I think the lockdown has sort of affected us in that way, because even though Ellen Road would be screaming Leeds to get forward, as it always has done, they're doing it anyway, even without the fans there. So, I do think we've suffered a little bit from that teams, they say teams have worked us out, but a little bit there has. I think there was an interesting comment by, I think it was Keown of all people on the Palace commentary, where he said that their keeper just wouldn't roll the ball out because he knew that that's what we wanted him to do. So every time he got the ball, he just booted it long. So we had to, even though we could win the ball back, we'd only 25, 30 yards from our own goal when we had to. So everything sort of starts back from square one. And I think there is a touch of that people are working us out. But I also think that Bielsa is working out how to work, to beat the fact that the people are. He's not naive, I don't think, at all. I think he's aware of the fact that, people are exploiting some of the flaws that they've seen so far.
Yeah, I think the first thing we saw of it was the City game at Ellen Road, where they very obviously set a trap against Calvin Phillips from the play out from defence, where you saw Foden and Kevin De Bruyne not quite marking Calvin, but in and around him, making him the only pass available, and then closing him down. But what we've seen with this team over the time that Marcelo's been there, and the type of player we've got, is we're incredibly resilient. And I feel that when we get Calvin back in there and we get Rodrigo back, and they're going to add a little bit of quality that we've possibly been lacking in the last couple of games. And I'm just not. I don't think the last 2 games were 4-1 defeats, if I'm honest, on the basis of play. No. I felt like we were in both games enough to not get beat 4-1. But like you said, it's the trade-off in the way that Bielsa wants his team to play. He very much believes in football's an art form, and we're there to entertain. We certainly get entertained by him, without a doubt. So it's going to be exciting and interesting going forward.
Sorry, if Pablo Shutt goes in against Leicester, the game's there for us, and we would have gone for the game. He wouldn't have just gone for a point. And you'd think that the momentum was shifting all the time towards us. but Vardy's lethal, and Maddison's lethal, and the Turkish lad that they brought on, I can't remember his name, but he too, as an impact sub for 20 minutes. For us to miss, Rodrigo's our record signing, isn't he? And for him to be out for a couple of games, just as he seemed to be, dictating the play and really getting involved in that new role for him, it's been a huge blow. And obviously Calvin is irreplaceable. I think Struijk's going to be a really good centre back. I just wonder, in that position in front of the back four in the Premier League, whether he's quite ready for that now. And he looked a bit, slow to react against Palace, certainly. But I think he's played very well when he's played, as a centre half.
Yeah, and he's just signed a new 4.5-year deal as well just before we came on air, which is nice to see. Him and Charlie Kerr as well, both signing new deals in the last couple of days. So the future's bright, and there's lots to be positive about, I think, at the moment. And I'm just looking forward to it coming back. I've grown to dread the international break now. It either breaks us players or it's just dreadful football. So I just want Leeds back, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll all be happy on Sunday just to get to see them again, because you're right. I mean, having a third international break, by between September and November, and it's 2 weeks every time. It's just, I know there's a huge backlash against international football, and I understand that people still love it, and certainly tournament football, and there's a price to pay for tournament football. You have to qualify, but it just seems so crammed in, and it's broken the whole rhythm of the season. And Marcelo, whose workplace is the training ground, has had nothing to work with, or very few numbers to work with for 6 weeks so far of the season, which can't be right, given that they didn't have a proper pre-season as well, which is where he does everything, really.
Yeah, I mean, Diego Llorente is the point in case. I think a few people forget he actually plays for us. We've not actually seen him in a Leeds shirt yet. He's been away on international duty, got broken essentially, and we've not seen him since. And you just feel like that could be avoided, really. I think. I think the international breaks that we've had have been a little bit excessive, and obviously now there's becoming more and more of a push for people getting injured to try and cut them down. So it'd be interesting to see what they do sort of long term with the international breaks, particularly after what's gone with COVID before. Before we start talking about the book, really, Rob, but you're better placed than I am for sure, because obviously you've done this absolute vast amount of research into the book. Can you put your finger on why Marcelo has been successful? And it's very easy to just turn around and say Marcelo's successful because he's an excellent coach. We talked about it briefly before we came on. I'm of the belief that he is an absolutely outstanding world-class coach who's lauded in many big circles. But I also feel that the ownership, him and his beliefs and his ethos have equally played such a large part in who's getting back to the Premier League as much as his coaching ability. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think we were a club that was crying out for direction, a club that was crying out for a plan. And I think what Marcelo has, and to be fair, Reevy and Wilkinson had it too, was a plan that involves, the organic development of a club based, right from its very foundations, that the fans are important, that the city's important, that the youth development's important, that it speaks to everybody, that it's not just about a narrow professional clique of players, that here today, gone tomorrow. As the hundreds of loan players that we had in the years building up to Marcelo coming, and I know we've still got a few, and it's part and parcel of the modern game, but it's about buying into the identity of what Leeds is about. And I think he's managed to convey that to all the players who have, someone like Stuart Dallas, who'd been here, a couple of years, in and out the side as a winger, fitting in every now and again. You can tell he's such a bright lad, that he's sharp, he knows what he wants. But he was just crying out for someone to say, look, follow me. This is what it's going to be. If you follow this, if you do this, it'll be right. And it helps that it's such an attacking, system that he's deployed. It helps that we're so attractive to watch. But it's more than that. And I think the ownership too, in the way that they've spent money on the ground, that the way that they've, one of my mates was a Newcastle fan, and I remember when Keegan came back to the second time to manage Newcastle, he said, Mike Ashley has listened to our deepest, darkest fantasies, and it'll probably not work, but he's listened to what we wanted. And I don't think that's quite the case, but I think I think that the ownership actually understood for the first time what they got. It wasn't all about, we'll buy a club and we'll flip it like GFH did. It wasn't like Bates, wanted a platform for himself. It wasn't like the lunacy of the Chilino era of clearing the decks and instigating years and years of mayhem where he's the center of everything. I think they're clever enough to know that it has to be about the bond between the fans, the public, and the club, and that's Marcelo all the way. Whether it's his politics as well as his coaching philosophy that does that. But the fact, I know it's such a, the fact that he lives in this 1-bedroom flat in Wetherby, the fact that he walks to the ground and he doesn't accept lifts, he needs time for himself, and there's that photo of him there on the P2, going to Elland Road, and you just think, I know it sounds soppy to non-Leeds fans, but he is a man of the people. And, I know rival Newell's Old Boys in his affections, but I think, we're pretty close in his heart now, because he does get us, and we've just fallen for him because he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, the thing with Marcelo, and I've talked about this so many times on the podcast that anybody who listens regularly will be fed up of hearing me, to be honest, but I read a book about him, and the thing that stuck out for me in the book was there's so many links to Marcelo and Leeds United when he was younger back in Rosario. I can't remember exactly what they are now, but there was links with like John Charles. I think Rosario Central wore white off the back of Leeds United. There's lots and lots of already little like sort of links between Yorkshire and Marcelo and sort of Rosario. And I just, again, it just makes me look at it a little bit more like sort of lovingly. And, you do go a little bit googly eyed over what he's managed to achieve at the club, to be honest. And, people at work, when we engage in football conversation, I invariably always come back to Marcelo and his quirky ways, and it's actually a bit frightening to wonder where we go from Marcelo after he leaves, which inevitably will do at some point.
He will, but hopefully they will stick with the system. I think that we are now a modern continental club in the sense that we've got departments that are engaged in all sorts of backroom staff. It's almost like having a permanent staff there. The manager, the coach might change, but the system essentially stays the same. And I think, they're really building long-term roots for this way of operating in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about all the modern stuff, and we've lauded Marcelo, as we often do on this podcast. So let's get into the book then, the biography of Leeds United, Rob. When did you think, do you know what, I want to write about Leeds? I want to write the biography of Leeds United. When did that sort of idea come up?
Well, I'd done the co-written the review book with my friend Paul Rogerson, and it came out in 2002. It's about that team. So it covers from 1960 to about 1975. And I'd always wanted to do a sequel to it, to do the declining years, because there's so many interesting stories from 75 to 1990. But no publisher was interested in it because they said, it'll be all doom and despair. Nobody is interested in that. Whereas, I was of the view that there would be. But anyway, so there was no immediate sequel. There was no way of doing that. And then I sort of been writing about Leeds on and off for papers since that book came out. But there was a real sort of drop off in terms of people commissioning stuff that was about actual football. It was all about Chilino. It was all about Bates. It was all about the soap opera. And I started to think I wanted to write a book that sort of emphasised the fact that we were still an organic, growing football club. This was the thing that, we're Leeds United Football Club for a reason. The football club is as important as anything else. And, just get the ball out, just focus on what it is. And it was when Gary Monk became manager. And suddenly you saw, and it happened so easily, didn't it? In terms of signing Pablo, getting Kyle Bartley, that the enthusiasm suddenly, that we'd been waiting for ever since, Grayson's first season back in the Championship. It was just there. And I think everyone realised that the spark, there was something that was happening. And I started to get, so I work for the Telegraph now, and I get more commissions in terms of, can you write about this? Can you write about that? So I thought, well, I was happy to do that. But then I started to think, well, maybe there's something here more in the long-term view of wanting to explain who we were, almost like a polemic, a manifesto. So, I mean, the book does struggle sometimes between we, calling us we, and them, trying to have your sort of cake and eat it, having a dispassionate view, and also, trying to explain my own sort of life with Leeds. So, I mean, with the centenary coming up, there was an opportunity to write a sort of a book about the centenary and 100 years of Leeds United. But obviously, I wasn't the only one with that idea. That Moscow did his book, and Rob Endicott and Andrew Dalton were all coming at the same time. So although my book, certainly apart from the last 2 chapters and the opening, were all written, with a view to go in 2019, the publisher decided, given what had happened against Derby, given the fact that the 3 books were coming and were ready to go, that we'd wait a year and see what happened. And so, that's when I started thinking, when lockdown happened, I was like thinking, well, do I write the last couple of chapters now? Do I write the introduction now? And then after the Cardiff game, you sort of, the gloom sort of descends, and you think, well, God, maybe it's another year then. But then, suddenly we kicked into gear, and the last couple of bits were just sort of flowed, because it was unraveling right in front of your eyes, and it was just so wonderful to be able to write about it.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Rob. Sorry.
No, I mean, it was just that thing. I had that fear that not through Cellino's negligence, through the the stuff that had happened with GFH, through Bates, that I just really wanted to tell people that so many people at work would say, what's going on with your club? And it would never be about, on the pitch. It would always be off the pitch. I just wanted to show that we are a living, viable football club. Things changed after I started thinking about the way I wanted to approach the book. So it is, it's almost like when you say we are Leeds, what does that mean? And I've tried to explain what it means to me, and how the history from us, being founded in 1919 on the back of a scandal in Leeds City being thrown out of the league to now, and how it's all shaped our character really as fans, as a club, and the way forward for us.
Yeah, and we discussed off air before we came on, Rob, didn't we? That for me, starting following Leeds United in sort of the early 90s, I'm obviously well versed on the Revies years, the great time under Don Revies, but prior to that is a real blank for me, and certainly prior to Leeds United, Leeds City was a massive blank. I knew we'd come from Leeds City, but I didn't know anything about it, and I've just got through the bit on the book about the decline and the, to be honest, the parallels between some of the recent owners we've got and what happened at Leeds City as well was pretty stark. How do you go around getting the research for that? Because how do you get the historical facts and all that type of thing? Is it old newspaper clippings or archives or? Yeah,
I mean it's exactly that. Yeah, unfortunately, as starting a project for a centenary book, most of the people, well, all of the people, pre 1950, just about are dead. So there's nobody to talk to, and so it is a bit of a detective story. Other people have written bits that you can investigate and look and take bits of facts from, and then try and test them and work out where to go. But it was largely newspapers for that thing, and people's memories of that, what their parents told them about what had happened and everything like that. So it's piecing it together, but it's quite difficult because football back then wasn't widely covered. So there are no player interviews of Wilf Copping or Bert Sproston or some of the really influential players before the war. There's very little of John Charles until afterwards. In the 80s, 90s, there are interviews about what it was like, but there's no real way of knowing how he was feeling in 1951 or 1952. Contemporary stuff. So it was a huge trawl of not just the Leeds newspapers and but the Yorkshire Post, the Nationals, but also around the country for away games and things like that, to try and bring some colour into those long forgotten episodes.
Did you have a particular bit of the book you really enjoyed writing? I know you're probably going to say all of it, but like a couple of people in the comments mentioned about GFH and Cellino and Ken Bates and the trials and tribulations we've had over the years. But there's still some sort of intrigue in them as well. I mean, I was active in the supporters trust during Cellino's time. And there's some still quite interesting facts in that about the way he approached business and the way he approached the club. And don't get me wrong, we look at him now in much better times, and we can kind of like with a wry grin think, well, yeah, but at the time it was utterly terrible. So how do you approach them terrible moments? And did you have a particular bit you enjoyed writing?
Well, I mean, the problem with those parts is that you are walking a legal tightrope all the time, particularly with a certain bearded gentleman who did once ring me up, and he didn't harangue me, but he sort of laid down a marker saying, if you're going to write about Leeds United, then get your facts straight. And all I'd ever done was written that, I think it was before we played Doncaster in the playoff final. I'd written something along the lines as, there's no disgrace Leeds being where they are when you consider, Professor Mackenzie, Ridsdale, Krasner, and Ken Bates. And he rang up and he rang through to the office, and someone I won't forgive put him through to me. And he didn't rant and rave or anything, but he just said, you get your facts straight, where you're going to the final, are you? Where did you get your ticket from, and all this? And it was all sort of slightly odd. But so dealing with that sort of period, you just have to play it factually straight as much as you can. And there's all sorts of stuff that may come out later, and I don't know half of it. And I'm sure everybody has stories about what happened under Bates, what happened under GFH, what happened under Cellino that are going to make for eye-watering additional information in the future. But it's difficult. So I stuck to it factually, stuck to a lot of, stuff that the trust had said, and tried to portray it as being, such a turbulent period, but not make it all about him really, or any of the three owners. I mean, I think GFH, looking back on it, was the biggest farce of all, really. I don't think that they were necessarily as malicious as in some of the things that they did, but it was utterly clueless, at times, and it was embarrassingly, unprepared for what they were taking on, and all those little charm offensives that they made, and then, I don't know, joining Wacko and asking for help with players, and looking at players on Championship Manager or FIFA for ratings. It was just, I mean, you can't, if that material wasn't true, and you tried to write it up, people would laugh at you. But it's all true. It's just astonishing, really.
Yeah, and then you got to look at obviously Massimo being chased away in a taxi, and sacking managers at half time, and all them other things that you just, like I said, we can look back now in better times and have a wry smile at it and think it was part of the process, part of the journey to get back to where we're at now.
Yeah, maybe it wouldn't be so sweet to be where we are now had we not been through all that, But yeah, I mean, the favourite part of the book for me was the fact when it got to the stage where I could actually talk to people. So, I didn't want to make it like just everybody else's voices. I wanted to make it mine. So I targeted as many people as I could. But I also felt that, no disrespect to them, a lot of the Revies team had already had, their say. They've spoken many times about it. And it's all fascinating, but I couldn't think of anything new that was going to come out of that. So when I spoke to, lucky enough to speak to Johnny Giles, I just asked him about the 72 Cup final, or try and target them a little bit on what it should be, rather than trying to have their whole experience of what playing for Leeds was like. And I mean, my favourite bit was going to see Gary Kelly in Ireland, and I only got an hour with him, but he was great, and he was telling me how precarious it was for him at Leeds, that that Howard would often tell him, you're going back to Ireland tomorrow, you're going back to Ireland, you're not progressing. This is when he was a forward, and then suddenly having a hunch. He played a couple of times, I think, in the Championship when we won the title, and then this following season he didn't even get a look in the squads, and he thought he was going to get bombed out. But that summer Wilkinson said to him, look, I've got this idea, you're going to play right back. And he was sort of up in arms thinking, what's going to happen? But like, he drilled him for like 6 weeks and would constantly put Rod Wallace up against him in training. And then just before the Man City game, the start of the season, he said, you're going to be all right. And then like, that's his whole career taking off then, he's the only player, that didn't play under Revies that's played more than 500 games for Leeds. And it just turned on something as like that. And he says himself, that Howard threatened him, do you want to go home? And he said, yeah, I was homesick. I've always wanted to go home, But, how he quickly transformed that. And there's a lovely little thing when Graham takes over, that the amount of drilling that they're doing on the back four, it's constant. That it's the back four and defensive midfielder all the time, like hour after hour after hour, morning and afternoon for days. And he says he's back in his kitchen at home and he's looking at his wife, and he goes on the half turn to look up the line, and she's stood on his shoulder, and it's like he's battering his head, thinking, what have I turned into? But this is what Graham was like. He's not we don't have the fondest memories of George, but for that one full season that he had, that's when, we really started moving forward again. And I just thought that was, so yeah, the talking to people was great.
Yeah, and you managed to catch up with the ever elusive David O'Leary. He doesn't do, I'll be honest, I've been chasing him for Talking Shutt for the best part of probably 2 years, the entire time we're going, because, it'd be great to talk to him about it, but for whatever reason, I've missed his advance. He's missed our advances so far. But I mean, what were it like speaking to David about? Because really, prior to this getting promoted back to the Premier League, they were the last set of glory years, if you like, when we flirted with winning the Champions League. So what were it like speaking to David about that?
It was really good. I mean, I must admit that it was one of the reasons. The reason I got him to speak was because it was so focused. It was I got a contact to a friend on the paper, and it had to be about Istanbul. It had to be about the murders. But just to get his perspective on that was brilliant. And I do think, and I know it's not a popular view, I do think that he gets a really bad press. That all of the faults that he's perceived to have could have been countered if the players had more discipline, and particularly, if the board had more discipline and more restraint, more, knowledge of, well, it's not knowledge really, because I'm sure they were. I just don't know what. Well, I do know what went on. They got drunk on the idea of building this European super club and doing it instantly on borrowed money. But so it was great to talk to him, and he had strong memories of hearing the news of what had happened down in Taksim Square, and how deeply touched and moved he was by it, and how inconsequential the whole game was, and felt, I think, that they'd been put in a terrible position by UEFA to go ahead and play that game. Yeah. But he talks about how the fact that he'd been to Turkey before playing for Ireland and with Arsenal, and it had always been quite, he'd been very tense and a really horrible atmosphere. But the people away from the football were brilliant. But he really felt that was the worst experience of his life. The whole, how do you speak to the players? How do you speak to the public? How do you deal with all this? Because it was such a horrific incident that happened. And then, so yeah, I was fortunate enough to get to speak to him. It would have been brilliant to have a proper career retrospective. But I don't hold him responsible really for all the things the decline that happened. And I don't know if you've listened to some of those Under the Cosh podcasts that have interviewed some of those players, but the Michael Dewberry one that came out recently, I found it quite infuriating that he talks about, the games that they used to play, the 50p game, where they actually during a match that they would just like pass a 50p to each other, and whoever was left with it would have to pay a fine at the end of it. And you think, well, obviously, if O'Leary had known about that, he should have done something about it. But surely the players have to take some responsibility for everything. They have to take some responsibility for the Majestic. They have to take incident. They have to take some responsibility for going out. And I just wish that somebody had taken the players to one side and said, this is on you. This is.
Yeah, I wonder if certain players may have an axe to grind, shall we say, because I heard another podcast with with Michael Dubry over in Australia with Michael Bridges for Optus Sports, I think, and he was a little less than complimentary towards David O'Leary actually, and his coaching methods and his ability as a manager. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously two sides to every story, but the players do have to take some form of responsibility for what went off at that time, and what went off afterwards of that. Was there anything then, Rob, in the book that particularly surprised you where you thought, oh, I never heard about that, or I didn't know about that, or that's a real surprise?
Well, I mean, I sort of went into the whole of the pre-Revie stuff, virtually blind. Obviously, I knew quite a lot about John Charles, and I'd heard the names of Copping and Sproston and Ernie Hart. No, I mean, I think the thing that really surprised me was how it links more than anything. When you're delving into that history and you find that the club is certainly in the 20s and 30s was facing desperate problems in attracting finance, desperate problems in attracting supporters. They always seem to be, every week, in the Yorkshire Evening Post, there'd be a lament that, the more people weren't going to the ground, that more people weren't supporting the club in terms of they had this bond scheme in the late 20s to buy out the original owner, Hilton Crowther, and how that sort of saddled them with debt for the next 20, 30 years, which really sort of hamstrung the way that we were able to sort of grow as a football club. That it took 40 years for them, and their darkest moment really at that point when Revies, like Cellino, a man with a plan, was given the reins and fully backed by a chairman. So all that prehistory stuff, the Major Buckley stuff, the Rach Carter stuff, and John Charles, it's all brilliant. But the theme that runs through it is sort of an alienation between the city and the club for too long. I was saying, it's my view that we've actually never been more popular than we are now. If you track it through gates, obviously, we've got a restricted attendance now. But you look at the memberships, you look at the amount of publicity that we get, our worldwide fan base, and through Marcelo now, our growth in South America. And I reckon if we had a 50,000 seater ground, we'd sell it out now. Whereas we did have a 50,000 attendance ground for much of the 60s, and we are, the best team in Europe. And gates fluctuate all the time because there is a curious, or was a curious, indifference to not just to Leeds, but to football in the city for quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rob, to wrap it up then, your book, which I've got here, the biography of Leeds United, where can people buy it? And I would absolutely implore anybody to go and buy it as well.
Well, you can buy it from, now the bookshops are currently closed. You can buy it from bookshop.org, which gets your local bookshop to send it to you. Or obviously it's on Amazon, a bit cheaper on there. Or the publisher itself is Vision Sport, and it's visionsp.co.uk, and they've got some signed copies if people want a signed copy. Or if people hit me up on Twitter, which is @UnforgivenRB, I can send out signed plates and stickers if they want a signature. But yeah, hopefully once the shops reopen, it'll be in the Elland Road Superstore and the shop in town. I hope anyway. That's what the club said, so we'll see.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I'm sure it will be. And as Alison and Marty Adams, who are regular listeners of the podcast, have just mentioned, a great Christmas gift with Christmas coming up and the lockdown due to end in whenever it's due to end. I'm not too sure now. I don't really keep up. So whenever that's due to end, get yourself out or get yourself it ordered on one of the websites that Rob just mentioned, and it's a perfect gift for any budding Leeds United fan in your house, or even non-Leeds United fans. All these fans who keep saying, what is it about Leeds United? Read Rob's book, or give them Rob's book, gift them Rob's book, and they'll be able to find exactly where it is. So, Rob, a massive thanks for your time, mate, taking time out of your day to come and speak to us. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it, and I'm really enjoying the book. And I'll drop you a text when I've got all the way through it. But massive thanks for your time, mate. It's been a real pleasure.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Gary. That's been brilliant.
Thanks, mate. And for anybody who's commented, thanks very much. Obviously, didn't get to read too many comments out, but we did cover the majority of them. The podcast from last week, which was supposed to have Ian Baird on, but didn't because his computer broke and it just had us three on it, is out now to download. So make sure you download it. And again, make sure you pass the podcast around, tell other people about it, like, subscribe, and all that type of stuff. And we'll be back on Wednesday of next week. Well, I won't. The other lads will. I'm away with work. So they'll be back on Wednesday to cover the Arsenal game, which will hopefully mean 3 points. And that's the end of that. So, yeah, again, Rob, thanks very much for your time, mate. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and speak to you and talk to you about the book. And we'll see you again soon.
Brilliant. Thank you.